The Smiths had no children and decided to use a proxy father to start their family. On the day the proxy father was to arrive, Mr. Smith kissed his wife and said, "I'm off. The man should be here soon." Half an hour later, just by chance, a door-to-door baby photographer rang the doorbell, hoping to make a sale. "Good morning, madam. You don't know me, but I've come to—" "Oh, no need to explain. I've been expecting you," Mrs. Smith cut in. "Really?" the photographer asked. "Well, good. I've made a specialty of babies. That's what my husband and I had hoped. Please come in and have a seat." "Just where do we start?" asked Mrs. Smith, blushing. "Leave everything to me. I usually try 2 in the bathtub, 1 on the couch, and perhaps a couple on the bed. Sometimes the living room floor is fun too. You can really spread out. Bathtub, living room floor. No wonder it didn't work for Harry and me." "Well, madam, none of us can guarantee a good one every time. But if we try several different positions and I shoot from 6 or 7 angles, I'm sure you'll be pleased with the results. I hope we can get this over with quickly," gasped Mrs. Smith. "Madam, in my line of work, a man must take his time. I'd love to be in and out in 5 minutes, but you'd be disappointed with that, I'm sure." "Don't I know?" Mrs. Smith exclaimed. The photographer opened his briefcase and pulled out a portfolio of his baby pictures. "This was done on the top of a bus in downtown London." "Oh my God!" Mrs. Smith exclaimed, tugging at her handkerchief. "And these twins turned out exceptionally well when you consider their mother was so difficult to work with." The photographer handed Mrs. Smith the picture. "She was difficult?" asked Mrs. Smith. "Yes, I'm afraid so. I finally had to take her to Hyde Park to get the job done right. People were crowding around 4 and 5 deep, pushing to get a good look." 4 and 5 deep?" asked Mrs. Smith, eyes widened in amazement. "Yes," the photographer said. "And for more than 3 hours too. The mother was constantly squealing and yelling. I could hardly concentrate. Then darkness approached and I began to rush my shots. Finally, when the squirrels began nibbling on my equipment, I just packed it all in." Mrs. Smith leaned forward. "You mean they actually chewed on your, equipment?" "That's right. Well, madam, if you're ready, I'll set up my tripod so that we can get to work." "Tripod?" Mrs. Smith looked extremely worried now. "Oh, good God, yes. I have to use a tripod to rest my cannon on. It's much too big for me to hold while I'm getting ready for action." Madam. Good Lord, she's fainted." One evening a man was at home watching TV and eating peanuts. He tossed them in the air, and then catch them in his mouth. In the middle of catching one, his wife asked him a question, and as he turned to answer her, a peanut fell in his ear. He tried and tried to dig it out but succeeded in only pushing it in deeper. He called his wife for assistance, and after hours of trying they became worried and decided to go to the hospital. As they were ready to go out the door, their daughter came home with her date. After being informed of the problem, their daughter's date said he could get the peanut out. The young man told the father to sit down, then proceeded to shove 2 fingers up the father's nose, and told him to blow hard. When the father blew, the peanut flew out of his ear. The mother and daughter jumped and yelled for joy. The young man insisted that it was nothing. Once he was gone, the mother turned to the father and said, "That's so wonderful. Isn't he smart? What do you think he's going to be when he grows older?" The father replied, "From the smell of his fingers, our son-in-law." A family took their frail, elderly mother to a nursing home and left her, hoping she would be well cared for. The next morning, the nurses bathed her, fed her a tasty breakfast, and set her in a chair at a window overlooking a lovely flower garden. She seemed okay, but after a while, she slowly started to tilt sideways in her chair. 2 attentive nurses immediately rushed up to catch her and straighten her up. Again she seemed okay, but after a while, she slowly started to tilt over to her other side. The nurses rushed back and once more brought her back upright. This went on all morning and was repeated again the following day. On the second afternoon, the family arrived to see how the old woman was adjusting to her new home. "So Ma, how is it here? Are they treating you all right?" "It's pretty nice," she replied. "Except they won't let me fart." A man brings his best buddy home for dinner, unannounced at 7:30 after work. His wife begins screaming at him, and his friend just sits and listens in. "Wife, my hair and makeup aren't done, the house is a mess, the dishes are not done, I am still in my pajamas and I can't be bothered with cooking tonight." "Why the hell did you bring him home?" "Husband, because he is thinking of getting married and I promised him a demo." An Irishman was drinking in a bar in London when he got a call on his cell phone. He orders drinks for everybody in the bar as he announces, his wife has just produced a typical Irish baby boy weighing 25 pounds. Nobody can believe that any new baby can weigh in at 25 pounds, but the man just shrugs. "That's about average up our way, folks. Like I said, my boy's a typical Irish baby boy." 2 weeks later, the man returns to the bar. The bartender says, "Say, you're the father of that typical Irish baby that weighed 25 pounds at birth, aren't you? Everybody's been making bets about how big he'd be in 2 weeks, so how much does he weigh now?" The proud father answers, 17 pounds. The bartender is puzzled and concerned. "What happened?" "He was 25 pounds the day he was born." The father takes a slow swig from his Jameson Irish whiskey, wipes his lips on his shirt sleeve, leans into the bartender, and proudly says, "Had him circumcised." So a KGB inspector goes to visit a Siberian prison to check on the inmates in their cells. First, he goes to the first cell and asks the inmate, "Why were you arrested?" The inmate replies, "My watch was always 10 minutes late, and thus I was always late for work, so they assumed that I was late because I was planning a coup." He then proceeds to go to the second cell and asks the inmate the same question. The inmate replies, "My watch was always 10 minutes ahead, and thus I always came early for work, so they assumed that I came early because I'm a Western spy." After that, he goes to the third cell and asks the inmate the same question as the previous two. The inmate replies, "My watch was always correct, and thus I always came to work on time, so they assumed that I smuggled the watch from the West." A man at the bar realizes it's getting late and pays his tab to go home. As he tries to get off the stool, he immediately falls flat on his face. "Oh, I must have drunk more than I thought," he thinks. He manages to drag himself over to the front door and pull himself upright, but as soon as he takes a step outside, he falls on his face again. "Oh boy, I really did drink too much," he thinks again. "Lucky my house is close by." He manages to drag himself over to his house, and with much stumbling, get himself into bed. Finally, the next morning, he wakes up and sees a note from his wife by the bed. "Dear," the bar called, "you left your wheelchair again.